In the first reading this Sunday morning, we're hearing about Solomon. It's the first book of Kings. Solomon was the third king to rule over the Israelites. First there was Saul, then there was David. Solomon is David's second son. And yet it was never God's plan that Israel would have an earthly king to rule over them. But God knows everything, and he knew that the people would sooner than later turn away from him. He had provided for all of their needs. Without God, they would not exist. And even though he had chosen them, and as a chosen people, that means he set them apart as a holy nation and a royal priesthood. That wasn't going to be good enough for little Israel. Israel today is about the size of New Jersey. And they looked around them and saw much bigger kingdoms and empires, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Macedonians, and they thought, we are defenseless. These other peoples have more gods than we do. That can't be good. These other people have an earthly king to rule over them. We don't. That's also a problem. And so rather than accepting the fact that they had a distinction, that God had chosen them and not anyone else, instead, even though God chose Israel, Israel did not choose God, and instead they wanted to be just like everybody else. And so that's why in the first book of Samuel, they rejected God and said, we want an earthly king to rule over us. And God said, I will grant you what you ask, but be careful what you wish for. Because he said, eventually, those kings will enslave you. And that's a slippery slope. And Solomon has his part to play in it. Solomon, I think, is misunderstood in history as being a much greater man than he actually was because of the exchange here, a gift given him by God. Anything that Solomon achieved, it was because God helped him to achieve it. The same could be said for any of us. But eventually what Solomon did with the gift that God gave to him was a disaster for himself, for his family, and for his people. It was a mistake that would have enduring and lasting effects for 1,000 years to split a country in two. But it was a good start. In 967 BC, Solomon comes to the throne. He will spend most of his reign building a temple for God in Jerusalem. His father had stored up all the money and materials needed to do it, but David had been told he himself could not build the temple because he had shed too much blood fighting in the wars of men. Solomon, feeling himself too young and immature and unworthy and incapable, you name it, he prays to God for guidance. And the Lord appears to young Solomon the king in a dream and said, ask anything of me and I will do it for you. We want to have that kind of dream. Unfortunately for Solomon, it will turn into a nightmare. Solomon didn't ask for long life. He didn't ask for great wealth or even increase in power or more territory for him and for his people. Instead, he defines himself as a servant. He refers to God as king and says, help me to have an understanding heart so that I may know right from wrong and better serve you and the people entrusted to me. Beautiful, just what we want in an earthly ruler, one who recognizes that their power is not supreme, it comes from another who will always be greater, and that they are in fact called to be servant leaders, to follow God and lead other people to him. If the kings of Israel pulled that off, it would have been perfect, and the Old Testament would be much shorter. But instead we have this cycle of lather, rinse, and repeat, where God chose the king, he gave them whatever power and authority they possessed, and then that power, instead of going to their heart to make them servant leaders, it went to their head, and that just kept swelling with pride. And eventually, that power which goes to your head will slip through your fingers. That's what happened to Saul. That's what happened to David. And we'll see how it plays out for Solomon. God didn't just make Solomon wise in answer to his request. He made him the wisest man the world had ever seen. To the point where in chapter 10 of the first book of Kings, it says rulers came from all over the world to consult with Solomon about how to solve the problems in their own countries. But then the more people that came to seek Solomon out, the less he relied on God for the gift of wisdom God had given to him. He became a little bit too self-reliant, or perhaps a lot. There are rules. There are rules that govern even kings. Even leaders have to follow the rules and stay in your lane. Stay between the lines. Solomon, he started to go astray. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 17, written 200 years before our friend Solomon comes to the throne, defined the rules for kingship in Israel. And it said, "You shall not have many wives, lest they lead you astray." Do not have many wives. Solomon, chapter 11 of the first book of Kings. It tells us right at the start of the chapter that at one time, Solomon wasn't just married to one wife or 7 wives. Solomon had 700 wives at the same time, and 300 concubines. That is one busy man. How did this come about? Could he not be a little more picky or finicky in his choice? He couldn't say no to love. It was a political decision. It was Solomon thinking he was pretty smart and had it all figured out. He knew how little Israel was. He knew how defenseless they were, and that they only won wars when God fought those wars for them. So he looked around and he knew how powerful the Assyrians were in the north, the Persians in the south, the Babylonians in the east. And he decided those kings will never attack us if their royal blood flows through my house in Israel. And so he went on an ambitious campaign, overly ambitious, to find the princesses of those kings and to woo them and to marry them and to bring these foreign women into his home. And it just kept coming and coming and coming to the point where there were, in fact, 700 of these women. He couldn't even keep their names straight. And he's having children with many of them. Unfortunately, he's also allowing these women to bring their culture and their religions into Israel, into his house. And none of these women were Jewish. And thus it was, and I hate to say this, have you heard the phrase happy wife, happy life? Times that by 700, and you'll see the problem that Solomon has entered into. Because, yes, he's building the temple at Jerusalem to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he doesn't want anybody to know. He's also building another temple to that God and another temple for this wife. And he is worshiping those pagan deities right along with them. And he takes it to an illogical extreme. And then he begins to break all of the rules, all to try to hold on to his power and to prevent his people from being attacked. Well, the biggest problem is some of these false gods, their adherents had some really strange ideas. Solomon got to the point where he was worshiping Ashtaroth, also called Astarte, and also Milcom, otherwise known as Moloch. We know him in the Old Testament as Baal, the god of the Canaanites. And the real problem in both these cases isn't just the fact that Leviticus said no one in Israel shall worship Ashtaroth or Molech, Astarte or Milcom. Why? Because those adherents of those pagan deities murdered children to try to appease their god. Solomon is part of these cults now. He's claiming to worship the God of life, but he's also worshiping pagan gods of death, and he is allowing human sacrifice, the death of children, in order to try to keep these wives happy. He's breaking all the rules. He has squandered the gift that God given to him, and it's not just going to have consequences for him. Solomon's reign, imaginably and rightfully so, gets cut short. He left no clear line of succession. He had so many wives with so many women that all those ladies thought, my son should be king. No, my son should be king. And so when he was dead, those sons began to make war with each other, and it split the country in two in a civil war, and the country remained divided for 1,000 years until Rome destroyed it all, burnt all the bridges, and dispersed all the people. What we see is that Solomon was granted a wish. Solomon did not respect the wish that was granted to him or the giver of that wish. Instead, he got drunk on his own power. The wisdom that God gave him, somehow, Solomon thought, that's mine now. I generated that. I'm capable of that. I no longer need God. I can have all kinds of gods, or I can be God. And he became captain of a ship that sank Israel right to the bottom of the sea. If only he had the respect for the gift that Jesus spoke of in the gospel today, when in Matthew chapter 13, he describes our faith as a treasure, that pearl of great price, that we would sell everything in order to possess it, just like Jesus and the apostles who left everything in order to follow God and fulfill his will. But it's that treasure buried in the field. Now, we've already got it. Many people don't know the treasure that we have in these earthen vessels like we do, and many people have wandered away from it. Others have let it go to their head instead of their heart, and it slipped through their fingers just like it did for Solomon. But here in the Eucharist, we receive the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, the same Jesus who walked on water, turned water into wine, wine into his blood, who calmed stormy seas, who raised even the dead. In 10 minutes, he'll be right here, and we get to leave with him. Where we go, we should ask him, where should we go? What should we do? All the things that Solomon should have done, we still have the opportunity to do. And that proves the last part of the gospel, where Jesus then said, the kingdom of heaven is like the net thrown into the sea. It doesn't just catch fish, it catches anything that floats by, and also trash. And then they have to separate them out. And this was a theme that Jesus spoke of again and again. When he said, the day is coming, says the Lord, he often referred to the judgment at the end of time when there will be a separation from the wheat and the chaff, the sheep from the goats. And for those of us who want to be in that number when the saints go marching in, we would do well to learn from Solomon's mistake. God may not give us everything we want. God has given us everything we need. God owes us nothing, but God has given us everything.